ocean fronting public roads rulemaking initiative with DLCD. I'm Meg Reed, the Coastal Shores Specialist for
Meg,
DLCD.
Yeah. Can we wait just a second until the live stream is going?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you said it was going.
Okay, it is going now.
Okay. Thank you. And I think we still have a few people that we're waiting on as well. So
okay, sorry.
That's okay. We'll get going officially soon. But yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. And I think, let's see, let me just check my participant list to see. I know that Nan will not be joining and Jack will not be joining. So I think maybe we need Charlie and Melissa. Am I missing anyone else?
Like Charlie Plyman is coming in.
Cool.
And Steve
Laurel. Yeah, great. Okay, I think then we may have, let's see, everyone except for Melissa. So we'll get started and then hopefully she will join us shortly. So again, welcome everyone to the third meeting of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for the Ocean Fronting Public Roads Rulemaking by DLCD. I'm Meg Reed, the Coastal Shores Specialist here. And I think what I'll do first is offer the land acknowledgement, and then we'll do a round of introductions. I know that we are starting to get to know each other a little bit better, but still good to do some introductions. Also, the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube at our DLCD YouTube channel for anyone of the public who wants to view the meeting, and it's being recorded as well. And so that recording will be posted to the rulemaking webpage after the meeting is completed. So that I would like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory and honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call Oregon. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together. So I will go around and just call on you, and if you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself and who you're affiliated with, and also if you can put on your camera to the extent possible throughout the meeting, that's also appreciated. So I'll start with Beth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Stinnett. I go by Beth. I live out at Cape Blanco, Sixes, Oregon, which is the furthest west point you can get on the continental United States. And this has been interesting.
Thank you. How about Cameron?
I'm Cameron LaFollette. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon Coastal Alliance, a coastal conservation organization focusing on land use. We are the coastal affiliate of 1,000 Friends of Oregon.
Thank you. Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Shipsey, and I'm General Counsel to the Coastal Management Program of the Department of Land Conservation Development. And I'll be able to join you for like the first half hour, and then I got to hop to another meeting, but I wanted to get a sense of what people's thoughts were. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Patty?
Hi, I'm Patty Snow, Ocean and Coastal Services Division Manager at DLCD.
Thanks. Jeff?
Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Crook. I'm the policy lead with the Climate Office at the Oregon Department of Transportation.
Thank you. Charlie?
Hey, I'm Charlie Plyman. I'm the Oregon Policy Manager with Surfrider Foundation, and I'm on the Central Oregon coast.
Thank you. Laurel.
Hi, everybody. Laurel Hellman, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. Nice to see everybody again.
Thank you. Chris. You're muted still.
You think I would have figured that out after this long. Chris Lady, Tillamook County Public Works Director.
Thank you. Mandy.
I am Mandy McNabb, and I'm administrative support and rulemaking for the Oregon Coastal Management Program with DLCD.
Thank you. And she's making sure everything is running in the background, so I'll try not to bother her too much. Lisa.
I'm Lisa Phipps. I'm the Coastal Policy Specialist, and my camera is going to be off for a little bit because I have a 2.5-year-old distraction on my lap.
Thank you. Hui.
Hi, I'm Hui Rodomsky. I'm the South Coast Regional Representative for DLCD.
Thank you. All right, I think we got everyone here. So as I said before, I know that Jack Stillwell and Nan Devlin will not be able to join us today, but they will be given the recordings of the meeting and the meeting notes. And then I did not hear from Melissa, but maybe she'll be joining us in a little bit. So thank you all again for being here. I'm gonna share my screen I just have a few slides to share before we get into the discussion. So let me get those up. So today is our third meeting, and we're gonna talk, I'll share a little bit of data for you all with a question that came up last time, which was about public ocean fronting roads that are not Highway 101. So where are they? How many are there? That kind of thing. And then a little bit of just high level overview of the permit criteria that State Parks uses when they do evaluate an application for an ocean shore alteration. And then we'll get into the rule language. As you hopefully saw through email, I did provide a few different versions. I apologize that there was a little bit of versioning happening on the fly, but hopefully you got the latest version, which will be what we'll start from today. And we can talk about that, and then any further considerations we want to address. And then the final piece will be the impact statements, which I also provided drafts of in the RAC packet that was provided last week. There are 3 impact statements that we need to finalize, which are the housing, racial, and fiscal impact statements. And then just a few updates on the rule timeline and next steps, and then wrap up. And we can decide at any point during this process if we want to have another meeting, a 4th meeting, we can certainly add that. We do have the time now that our rulemaking has been delayed a little bit with our first hearing with our Land Conservation Development Commission in July. So we don't have to have our rules finalized to the Secretary of State until the beginning of July, or really the end of June. So we do have time for a 4th meeting if we do feel like that's needed. Okay, so I did want to just share a little bit. So this is a rough analysis. I would say this is not a perfect analysis, but our GIS coordinator was able to come up with some ocean fronting roads on the Oregon coast that might be eligible under this goal exception that we're crafting here, and that are not Highway 101. And you can see like the screenshot on the right-hand side kind of highlights at a very high level where those roads are. And I would say this is overly conservative. So it's about 37 miles altogether. But not a lot of those, but some of those are probably not really quite what we're saying, but it's just kind of like was lumped into this high level analysis. They might be up on a headland, or they could be like a pretty far distance from the ocean, or along sort of a rocky shoreline. And some of them they do have road owner categories, and I'll show that on the next screen of how this all kind of falls into which ownerships. But there are several that are unknown, and that's not immediately clear at this moment who is the owner of those. So it could be private roads or other kinds of roads. And also the other thing that's not immediately clear from this data set is their development date. So whether or not they were developed on January 1st, 1977. They're color coded. The purple colors shows that areas that are not armored right now, but the green shows areas of road that are already armoring. And I don't know necessarily the reason behind that, but that's about 1.3 miles of oceanfront that oceanfront roads that have already been armored. And this is the breakdown of them by jurisdiction. And these are length in feet, not miles. So just want to call that to your attention. So these are the different entities of ownerships. And like I said, that one at the end is the unknown category where we're not quite sure who is the owner of those roads. Does anyone have any questions?
BLM, that's like significant, and that maybe surprises me. I didn't realize that they were such a landowner on the Oregon coast. Is that pretty consistently distributed up? I mean, I know where there's BLM land around Yaquina Head and around Cape Perpetua, but that seems like significant amount.
The note from the GIS coordinator is that the BLM segments are all in Coos County, just south of Coos Bay.
Okay. I know exactly where that's coming from then. Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Meg, I have questions, Cameron. The unknown category that we've been discussing is the largest one by far of all the others, which makes me feel a little queasy in terms of what we're rulemaking here that might affect a large number of roads whose owners we don't have any clue about. Is it possible to find the owners of those roads and discover whether they will be eligible for this exception or not?
I don't know. I'll have to look further into that, but I don't know. I'm not sure what the data set is coming from and like what the limitations are of it, but I can talk with our GIS coordinator about it.
Okay, the other thing is, I heard Steve Shipsey say he was only going to be in here for half an hour, and I do have a question for him about mitigation, if I can jump that ahead in the line whenever is good with you to make sure that I can ask him before he has to leave.
Yeah, and actually, and Steve, maybe if I can ask you too, I thought maybe you were able to come back to the meeting later, but maybe I'm wrong. Our meeting goes until 4 p.m.
Yeah, I believe I might be able to do that.
Okay, so that's another opportunity too, Cameron. But yes, that's a good idea. Let me get through these, see if anyone else has any more questions about the data, and then we can do that question if that's all right with you.
Chris, yeah, Chris Lady had one about ODOT I see in the chat.
Okay, Chris, did you want to ask it?
Yeah, in that list, you show Oregon Department of Transportation, 7,711 feet, so about 1.5 miles.
I think, that's a good point. The Highway 101 was not included in this analysis. So I don't know, Jeff, do you know of another road that's state owned on the coast that this could be? I'll have to double check where that is.
Not offhand. I don't want to misspeak. Maybe the ocean side. I think there's a spur highway that comes down.
There is.
That could be part of that. I'm not really sure.
So that's probably what that is, Chris, is something that's not Highway 101, but is state owned.
I would say some of the unknown. I did a quick check the other day, and Tillamook has about 7 miles of road. That's being overly conservative. So we show 5.4. So some of the unknown is probably going to fall onto a county or a city or private. So that kind of might help answer the question of the unknown mark.
Okay, thank you.
And Meg, could just to clarify, these aren't stretches that we know are suffering from erosion, but they're ocean fronting roads that could potentially qualify for the. Is that correct? They may
Right.
or may
So
not
you,
be.
yeah, you're saying that they're we don't know whether or not they are suffering from erosion. That was yes, that's correct. That was not an additional consideration. So it was just public, or sorry, just ocean fronting roads. Yeah. And I would say that certainly, when I looked at the data, I did not, look through every single one of them, but when I looked through some of them, there are certainly ones that I would expect that would never, or at least not in any time of the foreseeable future, be subject to significant erosion.
Do you know what the buffer analysis was? Was it capturing roads like 50 feet off the edge of, the bluff, or how was that done?
I don't know all the details. I think there were multiple data sets that were sort of overlain with the roads. So there was like a coastal shoreline buffer zone that we have for our goal 17 planning purposes, like toe of bluff, and the goal 18 eligibility data set. Those were sort of some of the things that we used. And then like having no other lot in between the road and the ocean, or the toe of the bluff, or whatever it was. So like no development tax lots in that in between area. But there are quite a few ways that the analysis went about, because as you know, the coast it wiggles all around, and so it's just hard to use one data set for it. And sometimes, the roads can be the tax lot of the road can be quite large. So tax lot data is certainly not a perfect proxy, but it's one of the better ones we have. Any other questions about the data set? Or if you want to look at anything in particular, I have the GIS open, so maybe like later on, if we have some time, we could just kind of look through it and see where some of these, so you can see examples of what it looks like. But I don't necessarily want to take up too much time, because we do have a full agenda today. Any other questions before I move on to the next slide? Okay, seeing none. And I'll ask Laurel to interrupt me if I'm getting anything wrong here, but I only brought this up because I just, again, just wanted to share as a reminder of what we're doing, that in the rule exception that we're crafting here is really just about eligibility to then apply for a permit for shoreline protection, and getting that through the local goal exception process for the road. And then it will, if it goes to state parks, because the shoreline alteration will be on the public beach, then they do have a set of standards that they evaluate every application against. And those are categorized into these broad buckets that you see on the screen here, which are safety standards, natural and cultural resource standards, project need, protection of public rights, evaluation of alternatives, public costs, scenic standards, and recreational use and access. And within each of those categories, there are several criteria that are written into the rule that are used, that must be evaluated in every application. So again, I don't necessarily want to go into the detail of that. And that information is on the Parks and Recreation Department website, and it's also in the newly released erosion control practices guidebook that DLCD recently put out. I did include a link to that guidebook in the RAC packet, so if you haven't taken a look, I would encourage you to do so. It does have, I think, pretty comprehensive information about erosion control practices used on the Oregon coast, as well as the policies around them, the permitting agencies and authorities, things about the beach bill, sea level rise projections, our coastal climate, things like that. So there's a lot of really good information in there, and these standards are discussed in a bit more detail in that guidebook. So it is a good resource for that. any questions or comments about this? Okay, so then I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so I can get the rule language up. But at this moment, Cameron, do you want to ask about the mitigation?
Yeah, Steve, are you still on?
Yes.
Good. A question came up from members of the public about whether or not it would be possible or appropriate to have language concerning mitigation in this exception. And I brought it up to Meg Reed, and she said that mitigation has come up before in conversations around goal 18, and it's a worthwhile idea. The difficulty, or at least the questions raised, have to do with how to define it or how to set it up properly so that it would actually work. Since DLCD is not a permitting agency, DSL has a mitigation program, but apparently does not, their legal authority doesn't reach to the outer shore. And so I just wondered if you had thoughts from a legal perspective of working with these agencies about whether mitigation could be included in this rule most effectively, and B, how it would be, what legal framework we would use to set it up, what agency or agencies would actually do it, and how it could be organized so it would be effective.
Good questions. I haven't worked with DSL's mitigation program. It's not a client agency, but I think so I'm not familiar with how that works in particular, but you know, other than a public roadway that was on the ocean shore that also happened to be in DSL jurisdiction for estuary or river, it would fall generally within parks authority because it would be ocean shore. So we would have to set, you know, the rule would have to, you know, look to see if there is mitigation authority in the parks ocean shore permitting. Yeah, I think, you know, the slide that Mag had up with the considerations, you know, the alternatives analysis has always been, you know, alternatives to the structure, not necessarily, you know, allowing the structure and mitigating it somewhere else. Laurel can correct me if I have that wrong, but, you know, that's my recollection. So it's, you know, it's an idea if the RAC and the agency's interested in pursuing it, we could look into and see where it lands us. Don't know much more than that for now.
I'm not familiar with all the intricate details of OPRD permitting, but I don't recall that they have a mitigation program like the DSL one that says if you are going to have an impact here, then you have to do a mitigation somewhere else, but preferably in the same littoral cell or something like that.
Yeah, that's I've never come across that, you know, it would make sense to do it in a littoral cell. You know, the DSL mitigation I'm most familiar with is you know, wetland, where they have the wetland banking and whatnot. I'm not visionary enough to think how that might work for the coast yet, but we can take a look.
Okay, well, so it sounds like if we're going to think about how mitigation might work for this rule, some work on a legal framework, or at least a change to administrative rules of some agency or another, probably OPRD, maybe DSL, to expand their authority in their existing mitigation program would be necessary. Is that right?
I think you're right there, and it might be even more than that. You know, if they don't have statutory authority to base a rule on to accommodate mitigation, then we would have to look at, you know, whether there was a statutory authorization that was also necessary in order to put that construct in place.
Okay, I do want to talk about that later, or whenever the best time is, to see what the best ways to address this possibility would be. But it does sound like it's not an easy slotting it in process.
What I kind of thought about with Lisa's help, and I know I see Lisa's hand raised, so I want to get to her too. But one sort of thing that we were thinking was hopefully you saw this in the newest version of the languages, we sort of create the space for that in this rule, that mitigation could be an option. And then the pursuing the mitigation option, which in my perspective would be nice to pursue that for all shoreline armoring, not just for those that are getting this exception in the public roads, but all new shoreline armoring. But regardless, we would pursue that mitigation program separately from this rulemaking process, but recognizing that is really important, and just like saving space for it in the rule now to not disallow it, but that recognizing we don't have a program right now and we don't have the authority to create one right now. So that was kind of one thought we had. But Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to further expand on something.
No, you said what I was going to say, Meg, and probably better, and felt like this just might be a place where Steve could weigh in about the feasibility of that approach.
Steve, any thoughts? Immediately putting you on the spot.
I think I better go to that other meeting. Sounds like, yeah, I don't have an immediate reaction.
Okay, well, it's something we can discuss further. And I think Charlie, did you have your hand up?
Well, I feel like, through the Surfrider channels that I represent, we've kind of raised this issue with every riprap permit that, takes up some ocean shore space, is how do we mitigate that ocean shore loss? And so what I remember in the past that has kept coming up is a legal challenge with mitigation, and maybe not insurmountable in this case with roads, but is that there's some like site specific geographic considerations, like it has to happen, and maybe Steve knows more or can fill in more, but the hesitation was the mitigation had to happen on that site, that specific spot on the ocean shore, which legally there was, and I felt like there was a case in Florida or something like that kind of turned this on, but maybe I'm misremembering. Nonetheless, though, I think Surfrider and our membership, and I think that the public that we're representing on this body is really interested in mitigation opportunities for the ocean shore.
Thank you.
Yeah, likewise, the public I'm representing also really would like to see a functional mitigation program working on any time the riprap or other armoring takes up ocean shore space, to have a good, solid, functional mitigation program that doesn't have to be on the exact spot. I mean, that seems kind of ridiculous. How would you actually make that work? But very nearby, I would say in the same littoral cell would be reasonable if possible.
And Melissa, I see your hand, and then Laurel.
Thanks. Sorry for being off camera. I got called out of town on a meeting unexpectedly. I have also been talking to people about the Oregon Coast Trail, which is another project that I'm involved in. And they also have concerns about the shoreline armoring potentially taking away sections of the beach where people currently walk as part of the Oregon Coast Trail. I think mitigation would help to alleviate those concerns. So I'm also in support of the idea of mitigation. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. And we can talk more about that. There was some, at least consideration of that put into the newest version of the rule language, the Oregon Coast Trail specifically. Laurel, did you have something?
I was just going to say that this process is for primarily, public roads and lands owned by public entities, and that might be something that's different from some of the other ocean shore alteration permits, whereas there is an ocean shore overlap. They are often properties owned by private properties, whereas this pathway is for public entities to protect public resources. So I just going to put a pin in that as maybe some sort of distinction in the future between mitigation for this type of work versus mitigation for work conducted on privately owned properties. For
like,
Steve.
do you mean like
for Steve there?
Do you mean like in this particular, like for the exception that we're talking about now and the language now, or do you mean like for this other idea that we're kind of talking about, which is like would potentially have to be a separately pursued project?
They likely both need to be separately pursued projects. My point being that this particular route for publicly owned properties might be different than on privately owned properties that have an overlap of ocean shore jurisdiction. I don't know. It's a question. I'm just.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Laurel, and it would certainly be helpful. You wouldn't be getting into the the Nolan Dolan takings aspect, of where you would if it was private property. So I'm going to go solve climate in a different meeting, and if I do that, then we won't need this rack because we're going to have sea level rise. So I'll be back hopefully. Bye.
Thanks, Steve.
Good luck.
Yeah, he should win on that project. All success.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate this conversation and bringing it up too. I think it's really important. How are people feeling about that though? Like, I mean, it sounds like generally there's support for doing some mitigation, and in particular for public roads, because it is a different sort of thing than in private property. And then, creating space for it here, but recognizing that we might not be able to create a new program yet for what mitigation looks like.
I'm generally in favor of mitigation requirements. However, I don't think they need to be applied to each and every location. I think each site is different. And should we need to go in there and armor a road to protect it from falling in, it could actually improve beach, the length of the beach, not the length, but the depth of the ocean to basically where the armoring is instead of the foredune. So I'm not necessarily sure a requirement for mitigation needs to be there, but rigorous hierarchy to determine should mitigation take place would make sense. And if so, what that mitigation would be.
Yeah, Chris, to me, mitigation is about mitigating a loss. And so in a project where there wasn't an obvious loss and there was potentially a benefit to the public recreation or beaches, and it doesn't seem like mitigation would apply in such a case. But I don't speak necessarily for those that may be more interested in like wildlife or other reasons for shoreline armoring.
It's the perception of loss is not necessarily the same from one agency to the next. So,
or individual or stakeholder for sure.
Stakeholder.
Okay, so why don't I bring up the new rule language, if people are okay with that, and we can talk about that. And I think that will further this conversation as well. So I want to make sure we can start getting into the nitty-gritty of the rule language. So let me just share my screen.
While you're pulling that up, I was curious how many miles of 101. I think you're looking at 37 miles of non-highway, non-ODOT roads, not roads that are not ODOT. How many miles of ODOT roads are we looking at?
I think Jeff could probably answer that question better than I can, but I think it's roughly 19.
Yeah, 19 that are in a landslide or erosion area.
Right. Yeah. So not like fully, but like those are that are
Right.
at risk.
Yeah, I think a comparable like GIS analysis would give you around 19. Yep.
Thank you.
I don't know if I shared the right screen. Sorry. Okay. Can you see the language now? The rule language? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. It will be hard because it won't all fit on one place if I zoom in. So we can take it a little bit at a time. Does anyone have any thoughts initially? Things you want to dive into right away? just wanted to, I guess, to like start from where we left off. It's basically at this juncture. This is what we had previously. And then everything that follows is new. And then the red text indicates the third iteration with a few more details. And I can tell you the intention for me for adding this was to try to address some of the outstanding concerns that we had still from last meeting, which I think is kind of about justification of the need to armor and having a specific alternatives analysis, because, you know, as we kind of talked about, the reason is one of 4 tests that need to be met in getting a local goal exception, and that one of the other tests is about alternatives, but it's about alternative locations, not alternative methods. So it's really not quite the perfect fit for a beachfront protective structure. It's more for like converting forest land into something else other than forest land. That's kind of what that is meant for. So with this addition, you have it spelled out more clearly that the alternatives that need to be evaluated under these conditions would be non-structural alternatives, and prove why those would not work and why a beachfront protective structure is needed before, you know, moving forward with a with this exception application. So that was kind of one of the reasons for adding this.
Meg, this is Jeff. Just a question about process, because looking at all this additional step for the feasibility assessment, it feels pretty redundant to the work required for the OPRD permit. There's a geologic report, as you know, that's required for that. And actually a review of non-structural solutions is part of that work.
Yes.
And so that is an additional analysis there for that permitting process. So can you start to kind of walk through, like, where do you see this being the same and maybe different than the OPRD permitting process, and why it would make sense to do it at this stage of the goal exception?
Yeah, I think well, first, it is kind of redundant with that process, but I don't think that's a bad thing, because if you do it for this one, you can use it for that one too. But I think really the purpose for doing it at this stage was to prove, because like if you did these other things like hazard avoidance, non-structural stabilization, site modifications, like if you truly did those things, or at least did an evaluation of them, and you found that one of them could work, then you wouldn't need to go forward with an exception. But you then would trigger an exception if and only if that those other options would not work. And so it's really, I think it's important to prove that the only option that is necessary for this road piece is the beachfront protective structure. And so, yeah, it does require doing that work up front, but it seems like that's what you need to do to prove that you do need an exception for this beachfront protective structure, because you don't need an exception to do those other things. I don't know if Lisa or anyone else, because we worked on this together, wants to add to that.
I think you explained it exactly how we were considering it, Meg.
Thank you.
When you look at hazard avoidance options, including moving or relocating the road or highway, doing nothing or just simply removing the road in its entirety might be a better solution for some of these. If there's already exists another access, and this one truly may not be needed, just removing the road entirely is an option.
So you thinking that would be another option to consider here, is like we could add to that?
Yes. Hazard avoidance options, including removing, moving, or relocating the road or highway.
Say that again.
Hazard avoidance options, including removing, moving, or relocating the road or highway.
Okay, great. Thank you. Removing. Okay. Thank you. And I would say too that the order, we did do this intentionally. The order of the options would be the ones that are most preferred to the least preferred options. Let me know too if you want a different view of the screen.
While everybody's thinking, Meg, Chris makes me think about under B capital A. It's almost like all of them should say including but not limited to. We've just highlighted some of the options. It doesn't mean that they're the full extent of the options available. So non-structural stabilization methods or site modifications, someone could come up with something else. So these are examples of. So just to keep that in mind if we want to kind of make sure that's clear.
Where would that be? Sorry.
Last sentence just before capital A, the feasibility assessment shall evaluate at a minimum. The following alternatives would at a minimum reflect that, or maybe a capital E, other measures as deemed appropriate.
Like.
Right.
Yeah.
Then we get into who deems appropriate, and we're talking about the minimum, evaluate at the minimum. We start to hit that line out there.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Anyone else? Like it, don't like it, want to change it?
I appreciate the idea that we could do this work up front to kind of really look at those options of the methods to protect the backshore. And then that we could use that later in the permitting process. Of course, I'm looking at this as the applicant, right? So question is for OPRD, we need a certified geologist. And so I'm kind of wondering, for the feasibility assessment, we're doing some research partnering with OSU right now, kind of looking at some sites and understanding kind of along these lines, what are the options, those types of things. I'm wondering if there's, this is fairly prescriptive, but not specific to who generates the report, or the assessment. Is there needs to be a certified geologist involved or not? I guess I have some questions about the application and who would be like approving that assessment. Is it county by county?
Well, yes, yeah, because the application would go to each jurisdiction separately. So that would be, something that they would each have to evaluate. That's something I did think about putting in there, but it seemed like, that maybe that was not the right thing to specify, but we could, or kind of keep it vague. This is something we've been working on with local jurisdictions a lot lately, so it's top of my mind, but basically like geoprofessionals and who's qualified to do these assessments or not. And, from when we do it from a local development in a hazard zone perspective, we usually say, like, if you're in a landslide area and you're proposing a new development, you need to get a geologic hazard report done by a licensed geoprofessional, and that would be a certified engineering geologist or a geotechnical engineer. And it would have to, and we specify, what are the report contents at a minimum and what needs to be in there. So I've avoided putting that specifically in there, but we could say that this analysis must be done by a qualified geoprofessional. There's lots of licensing requirements for each of those that basically put it a little bit the onus on each of those individual practitioners that they can only practice within their field. So they, if you say the licensed qualified person, then it's a little bit of they will only do what they're qualified to do. But obviously there's some discretion there.
Meg? This is Cameron. I think that having some kind of framework language, like a qualified geoprofessional, is that a term, geoprofessional?
Yeah.
Is probably a good idea because it's not too specific, but it's a little bit specific. It means not a qualified, sociologist
Mhm.
who wouldn't have any knowledge about coastal shoreline issues. So it gives some guidance without getting too specific. The other question I have is E, other measures as deemed appropriate. That's a very unspecific little sentence there. What does that possibly mean?
I think the intention was to be like that these 4 things are not necessarily the only things that should be evaluated, and perhaps in each specific circumstance, other types of options that don't require an exception might also be something to be evaluated, but we don't want to put people in a box. So I mean, it already says this feasibility assessment shall evaluate at a minimum the following alternatives. So that already, I think, leaves the door open for more. But I think so I don't know, this is we can change it, we can change how it says or just take it out, but I think it's just to try to make it clear that other alternatives could be considered too.
And I don't think that it needs to be in there because the shall evaluate at a minimum, I think addresses that capital E.
Okay.
It removes the avenue of who deems it as appropriate. It raises the other issue as evaluate at a minimum, who determines going beyond the minimum, but I think they duplicate each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of don't like E because it's so extremely vague. It really doesn't give you any compass for what it includes.
Yeah. How do other people feel about that? Should we just get rid of it? Do we feel like at a minimum kind of covers it?
I think that Washington report you sent around, or maybe it was the Oregon one, but I think it was the Washington one that somebody sent, had a list of non-soft shoreline alternatives, and one of them was a seawall with potted plants on top.
Yeah, I saw that too.
That's definitely so we don't want people to be coming up with ideas like that.
With potted plants is really, that's just
with
something.
a seawall with potted plants, that's really something.
One thing to note about that too is there's a lot of application for the Salish and the Puget Sound that may not be as applicable for the outer coast in Oregon in that. So I've been a careful study of a lot of things in policy out of Washington that unfortunately a little bit more inland focused.
Right.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. I think that's a really good point. And something I wanted to bring up too about that report that I shared is that it's mainly focused on the Puget Sound, and that's obviously a very different wave climate than we experience on the outer coast of Oregon. So while it is nice, like I think that's a really well done report and it has some really good information in it, it's not necessarily applicable, and not only in the geography, but also in the policies. The policy framework for shoreline armoring in Washington is very different than here in Oregon. So we can't quite utilize the same sorts of approaches. Like they use things on a continuum of hard to soft, and we can't really do that because if something contains any structural solution whatsoever, it's considered, it has to meet eligibility. So like, I mean, certainly you could still do a hybrid solution. That's not allowed. It's just that you would only be able to do that if you are already eligible for a structure.
Meg, can you remind me how we landed on definitions for these non-structural stabilization, or did we avoid definition?
Do you mean from the Goal 18 focus group specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I think we came up with one as a group, like a practitioner definition. And the guidebook, which I just mentioned that we put out recently, that was in response to that basically that's us putting forth our definition of a beachfront protective structure. And while that's not, that doesn't change it in statute, it is a practitioner definition. So it hopefully gives people guidance on the policy and how to implement the policy.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that these you know, feasibility sort of options and assessment things that we were putting out there actually made sense to the practitioner on the ground. And then also, I think in the past, I was a little worried about some loophole around non-structural stabilizations and what we call what. So I felt like that's why we were struggling, lacking definitions there. But
I mean, I think that guidebook helps with this. And then, like, you know, these are discretionary decisions. So they're going to hopefully use whatever resources are out there to get to this point.
Well, I don't think on the outer coast we'll have to worry about seawalls with potted plants because they wouldn't last very long, although it's a cute idea.
Pots could become projectiles, which
Indeed.
yeah, might be really bad. Anyone else like thoughts about this? Do you feel like it's an important piece to keep in, and that you know, there always could be more wordsmithing that we have to do after this because of, you know, Steve's review of it or other feedback that we may get at public hearings throughout that process. And then, of course, our Land Conservation Development Commission will be reviewing this as well. But, you know, what we hope to put forth is something pretty near final for all of those entities to review.
I like having a feasibility study in there. I think it's an important step for a newly created specific exception process, that there be a specific feasibility assessment required for justification of doing yet more armoring of the coast.
Thank you. Patty, were you going to say something?
Yes, sorry, I didn't actually get a chance to look at this language before, but I like the feasibility assessment. And this is wordsmith, and I apologize, but I would get rid of where it says if and only if. I would get rid of the and only if. I just think that's kind of unusual rule language. So at the very bottom, there we go. Just so leave if. Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So in the vein of D, what do we mean by limits of area for relocation or cost when we're talking about bioengineered structures?
Oh, this is, and this is kind of an organizational thing. This is not specific to D. This would be for all of them. So all of these analyses of non-structural options shall describe why the alternatives are not feasible, or if tried, why they were not successful. Relevant factors may include topographic limitations, limits of area for relocation or cost. So those would be the factors that would be used to justify why those alternatives are not appropriate.
Environmental concerns, snowy plover, other things that might be federally protected. Just if we're going to talk cost, we're going to talk topography, then environmental constraints would be.
So it would be just sort of another.
Yeah.
And these are, I should say that these I borrowed from language that OPRD already uses. So that's hopefully helpful.
To push back a little bit on what Patty said, the only if and only if language, you see it more often in legal documents, but it's an effort to make it really clear that you really have to be in a very narrow place before you can carry on with the exception. You know, you have to really have shown that there's no other viable option. I actually don't have a problem with doing that, leaving the and only if in there. It's a, you know, a superlative. It's making it certain that you have really done a complete analysis. I don't feel strongly about it, but I don't think it is just merely repetitive.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we were coming from with putting that in there, is just trying to be like, this is the last viable option really for this road.
Yeah.
and maybe we can highlight it as a question for Steve too, of, if we can keep that in there.
That's a good idea.
So that's good. That's kind of the feasibility assessment. I think maybe what I'll do first is just wanted to also note that it added this one piece too, that there should be a justification that the beachfront protective structure will provide a significant public benefit. So kind of like, again, that demonstration of need, like why, because there will be loss on the side of the public beach. So there needs to be a more significant public need on the other side of protecting the road. So that's there, then the feasibility assessment. And then the third piece would be an evaluation of how the proposed beachfront protective structure will, and then it lists some things, minimize visual impacts, maintain access to and along the beach, including access to the Oregon Coast Trail, minimize negative impacts on adjacent property, avoid and mitigate long-term or recurring costs to the public, and minimize adverse impacts on water currents, erosion, and accretion patterns. And then that local sea level rise and climate change impact shall be incorporated into the evaluation of B through F above for the lifetime of the structure. This is where I was hoping to try to get at some concerns that have been raised about the Oregon Coast Trail and about mitigation. So this is kind of like, while it's small, it would just sort of provide the opportunity to do mitigation, and then with the hope that we could keep moving down that pathway. But we can talk about the different ways to that. So Charlie, I saw your hand up.
Well, I was trying to get at, and you kind of got to it eventually, the lifetime of the project and the liability of that, and then the criteria of the project to be met over the lifetime. Does like in a private road situation, will that be clear and transfer with ownership or homeownership or homeowners associations? I mean, I'm curious what that looks like. And then I'm also curious if we have an interest, and I know that like ODOT wouldn't put in a fix that was only going to be a 5-year fix. They wouldn't spend a lot of money going through a big extensive effort. So is there like a minimum for how long we would want the lifetime of the project to demonstrate that it would, serve its transportation need? Because, we're giving up a cost to the public here. And if that was for a road to exist for another 2 years, it might not be worth it. So I'm kind of curious how we evaluate that and what does that look like? Sorry, that was kind of a wordy.
No, that's a great question. I'm sorry to jump in. I think that's a really great question. And even for some of these non-structural solutions, they may not have the lifetime of a more permanent fix. And so you do have to kind of weigh those things. Looking at the costs, the maintenance costs, and the effectiveness, I think there is still a lot of research being done. Just taking like natural revetments, for example, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on, the slope angles, the effectiveness of those to protect infrastructure over the longer term. And, is that 15 years? Is it 20 to 30 years? And then what is required to continually maintain that over time, and what impacts might that have? So there are some things to really work out, I think, with some of these alternative solutions. Definitely worth exploring and implementing to see how they work. But I think that the idea of long-term solutions or the longevity of the features is really questionable for some of these. So anyway, just some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. Charlie, I think I might have missed some of your first question, but I think the answer is that this does not apply to private property owners. So this would only be maintained by public bodies.
Okay. Well, okay, so let me rephrase that then a little bit and just kind of think about how counties operate, and where county roads exist and who maintains those. Like they don't have big departments, and often there's like county. I'm on a road district. I maintain the roads in our county with 2 other volunteers. And so I think about a lot of those spaces and places that operate not so much on a 50-year plan, but on filling the pothole today. And so, you know, I do think that the bigger public entities like ODOT are going to be looking at lifetime of projects and be more responsible in how they, you know, do big capital improvement work. But, you know, goal 18, you know, these are emotional decisions that are made oftentimes in a very quick, short period of time. And that's what I worry about, is just like, are we going to patch the road and destroy the beach for a 3-year fix? And did we have the foresight of what the fix was going to cost us over time? And I'm just curious if there's ways and mechanisms to put in the rule to help us be more responsible. Again, we're talking about putting infrastructure in harm's way. We know that. That's why Goal 18 exists. So we should be trying to think about, as in many places as possible, how we can be really thoughtful about the lifetime of that infrastructure.
Yeah, I think you could put, I mean, generally what I've seen done before is just that it's kind of each structure is kind of, you have to make that decision, but we could put in something like 50 years. Maybe that's too much, but I also, to Jeff's comment, I think something that is important to think about or talk about is that with non-structural methods, they do require potentially more maintenance over time. So like if you did do a dynamic revetment, you would have to do new cobbles maybe every 5 years. And so that would have to be part of that consideration. But I don't think, like in my mind at least, like having to do more maintenance on a non-structural solution should not be a reason to say that that non-structural solution is not viable. I think it should be expected that those types of approaches are going to be more maintenance work over time, but that the loss to the beach would be less. So they would have more benefit, even if if that solution means more maintenance. So I don't know if there should be a way of putting that in there, that is like more maintenance does not equal not viable.
The life cycle analysis is what we'd be referring to. Is when we do this for our larger structures, does it make sense to do a big box culvert or a bridge? The box culvert might give me by 25 years, cost less than a bridge that will last 75 years. I do 2 box culverts for less than a bridge. So box culvert might get the nod. The problem with this is that nobody can, I think when you look at the engineered structures, you really know historical data for how long you're guessing. Is it a 5-year? Do you go out there and replace cobbles? How often do you need to rebuild burritos? I think that would be a very difficult thing with what we know of those systems.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add that you need to model the water levels over time too. So you need to pick a time horizon to say, are you looking to protect at a year 2050 sea level rise, you know, with that high tide, with that storm surge, getting that information and making sure you're designing something to be effective over the long term can also be a challenge. It affects the amount of material that you need to bring onto the beach as well in some cases. So there's that trade-off as well, is making sure that, you know, in this assessment, you're doing the engineering, which honestly, most transportation agencies don't have the chops to do, but getting the assistants to do the modeling work to be able to say, will this non-structural feature that may be portion of it placed onto the beach, will it be effective over that longer time horizon under certain wave conditions? So anyway, just that's another consideration that I know that we've explored and is something that would be, I think, a test as part of this assessment.
Cameron's had her hand up for a while, so Cameron, do you want to go ahead?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
thanks.
You
I was
can-
gonna move to the next question, which is the Oregon Coast Trail. As we were discussing just when the RAC began, I know that some miles of the Oregon Coast Trail involve walking on the beach, and I've done some of that. Do we have a map or some sense of how many miles or what percentage of the Coast Trail overall is on the beach? Because if we could overlay that information with where the weak places, known weak places are that might need this road exception, it might help us understand a little better how much we could be impacting the Coast Trail.
I've been trying. The data is hard to get, but I don't know if Laura wants to just share what she knows off the top of her head. But we're trying to get the data in GIS format. It's been hard to get. I think part of it is because there's still a lot of work being done on that, on which segments are where and on where there are alternatives. So we're still working on it. And once we get the data, we will do that, what you just said, but don't have that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Meg summarized it well. It's a sort of it's a work in progress, as several of you are engaged in that ongoing work along with us. So we can get an estimate for the existing mileage on beaches, and I chatted with Meg briefly a couple days ago about that. We just haven't gotten that yet.
Okay, great, thanks.
Did anyone, sorry, I feel like I saw someone then hand go up. Did I miss someone else who wanted to say something? Okay, the other thing I do want to address, Beth, you had a comment too in the chat, so I definitely want to address that too. But one thing I wanted to say quickly is sort of to your point, Jeff, about the lifetime and the modeling of the water and such like that. Well, I guess like something I would envision happening is, say, like you're not quite sure if a cobble berm will work for Highway 101, but there's a possibility it could. I think what we would like to see is that tried, and then maybe 10 years down the road, you're like, okay, this is not really working, or it's not worth it to maintain over this amount of time, and sea level data is getting better and we have new projections and it's just going to be too much. Now is the time we need to, because then you could show that that's like part of the feasibility assessment. You could show that it didn't work well. I think what we're trying to push here is like, yeah, we don't really know a lot about these non-structural options because we haven't really given them a chance. And we need to do that, and we need to study them and to come up with those design modifications. And who better to do that than public bodies? So I feel like that's where we kind of need to start like pushing people to go, is even though it's not, we don't have all the answers, and we do know that riprap does work, you know, under these certain conditions, and we have the design whatever, but like we need to start looking at these other things, because otherwise, are we just going to open everything up to shoreline armoring? Is that the way we want to go? I mean, I think there just needs to be some give and take.
Meg Florence brought something up in the chat. What about emergency repairs? You know, there was an article recently, was it OPB, about the Mulak Beach problem, where the highway is really almost gonna visit the sea, whether it wants to or not. So what do we need to have some language in here about emergency situations, and if so, what should it be?
Well, so ODOT already has an emergency clause. So if something really bad happens, they can just repair the road. And then they would probably have to come back and try and get a goal exception to do it more permanently. But Jeff can talk to that more. I don't know about that for local jurisdictions, if they have something similar, but we could think about adding that. I guess the point is with a goal exception, the point is that these processes take some time, and because they're exceptions to the goals. And so if those sites have been identified, you would want them to start early. So like for Beverly Beach area, for example, like that is what place where that maybe a goal exception should be started as soon as possible, because it's clear that, and there's already been a lot of work done on ODOT's on ODOT's side to assess that site and look at alternatives. So that might be the best test case to just try and kind of get something moving, because it could be an emergency situation soon. I don't know if Jeff has thoughts on that.
That makes sense.
So while
Nothing more to add.
Tillamook and, maybe some of these other counties, municipalities may not have a clause, an emergency clause in effect. Declaring an emergency is not necessarily as simple as that, but if, say we were to lose part of a road, we can get out there and start making some immediate quick fixes, and then we would go through the Goal 18 exception process. The same thing would be true with bridges as the rivers try to meander and take out a road. We've got one actually ongoing right now that the permitting agencies are not going to consider that as an emergency. So we're going through more of a lengthier process with that. But we didn't lose it. It's kind of in the situation with 101. So while we don't necessarily have an exclusion clause or an exception clause for emergencies, it exists, but I don't believe that's what the Goal 18 process that we're talking about is really intended to correct or hinder our ability to make improvements in an emergency situation.
I wonder, I mean, I don't know, but Patty or Lisa put you on the spots here, but like if we put in something like if I don't know, I just feel like it'd be hard to define emergency. Maybe we could use the same language that OPRD uses, but if there was an emergency situation in which the road needs immediate repair, that could be done, and then the entity has to go back and retroactively get a goal exception, or this is just not the place for it.
Well, I was just thinking, because OPRD has their emergency provisions, right? So they would be able to go in if the road was crumbling, and causing a hazard to life and everything, that ODOT could go in and repair 101.
Yeah, but the emergency provisions still require eligibility. So like,
okay,
because the road is not eligible, they still wouldn't be able to apply for an emergency permit.
And so Meg, are you suggesting that because the exception process is now available to roads, that emergency piece no longer, I'm sorry, that eligibility piece is no longer as strong of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't have the strength that it does when it's not an eligible property, but because an exception is a possible process, that we would then say that under emergency situations, and there are plenty of definitions to draw from, that it could be done. However, they would need to go through an exception, and if they were not successful for whatever reason, they'd have to remove it, kind of thing. They would no longer be eligible and they have to remove it. Okay.
I mean, that's sort of a thought. I don't know if we want to do that or not, but that's a thought.
Well, but any house can apply for an exception as well, but we don't allow them to put in riprap unless they get it. Right. So I'm trying to figure out why the difference.
I guess because of the public need.
True. And for 50 years, we've said in poo-poo on the public need, you aren't eligible for riprap.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think it's now we live in a different climate regime where this is the possibility of emergencies is more upon us than ever it was before.
That's the kind of thing that you just need to be able to explain why it's different.
Yeah. But again, I'm not necessarily advocating that we go down that pathway, but I just wanted to say that that's potentially something we could write into the rule. I think
I'd rather put incentives in place for, areas that could become an emergency, to have planning done ahead of time to divert said emergency, rather than put a loophole in here to address emergencies.
Yeah.
I think I feel that since there are emergency provisions in OPRD already, that that should suffice. I mean, we've all seen the pictures, I'm sure, of the combination of storm surges and king tides leading to, you know, major water in downtown Cannon Beach or Tillamook or whatever. But since there are emergency provisions already available and laws that the public entities have to follow, I think that that should suffice. We shouldn't have to put that in this specific exception as well, unless, you know, Steve, for example, feels that it's necessary and essential.
Yeah, thank
Meg,
you.
but didn't you say, and believe it's true, that those are only an option within our rules if it's an eligible property? We do not issue emergency permits for ineligible properties.
Yes, that's true. ODOT does have its own separate
That's a
thing.
separate thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, yeah, would be different. But again, yes, you're right. Yeah. So just want to make that clear that the emergency provisions are only for eligible properties. But I think, I mean, I think what Charlie said is a good point, like that we're hoping that people are planning for these things ahead of time and taking them into consideration so that they don't find themselves in that situation. Cameron, your hand is still up. Is that just from the before?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought once one got to speak that one's hand went automatically down.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I should have been doing that.
There we go. I'll take it down. Sorry.
No, all good. Thank you.
I think maybe the question is for somebody who would be dealing with an emergency is, would they be able to get through the goal 18 exception process quickly enough to go through?
I would say no. I mean, it's, yeah, probably months at least of work to go through once an application is actually submitted. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of things that go into an application. I think if I just use as an example, the goal 18 exceptions that occurred recently in Lincoln County for private property that was not eligible for shoreline armoring. I mean, there were years worth of work leading up to the applications actually being formed. But then once the applications were submitted, I think it took at least a half a year, maybe longer, till they got an approval. Okay, so seems like maybe we're just not going to address that in this section. Any other things that people feel like we need to add that we haven't added, or still questions about the language itself? Maybe going back to that lifetime of structure question, should we put in a lifetime?
If we back up just a smidge, if we may.
Yeah.
When we look at this work, it's going to require the OPRD permit, and in the permit would be, like mentioned, that's where the emergency language is in. Mm-hmm. So despite this, you still have to get an OPRD permit. You know, the emergency work is covered under OPRD, then it doesn't need to be in here.
Yeah, right.
But
yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
But right now, the properties are not eligible even with this provision. And so OPRD's rules are for eligible properties only. So they still want to apply to the roadways.
Right, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So the only way that it can apply to the roadways is if there's some provision in this rule that will allow that to happen. Otherwise, they won't be eligible under any circumstance until they get an approved exception.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, but I guess one thing that could happen, which actually did happen for one of the properties in Lincoln County, is they went through the goal exception process, and then once they got the approval, they applied for an emergency permit. Sure. So sure. Like that part could go a little bit faster. But yes, you'd still have to get the exception itself, which wouldn't necessarily be fast.
Right. So yeah, it definitely would not fit definition of emergency going through our process.
Meg, this is nitpicky, but I do notice that the word beach appears in here often, and it's kind of interchangeable with ocean shore. And I don't know if that matters when you are legally talking about where we are providing access to and stuff. So just, we might want to be consistent and use one thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. I think maybe, and Laurel maybe can confirm this or not, but probably should use ocean shore since that is defined.
It is, Meg, but the goal 18 isn't confined to the to the ocean shore, right? So
yes,
I guess it depends on whether you only mean it to apply to the ocean shore, or you also mean it to apply to other areas where goal 18 has applicability.
Well, I just want it to be crystal clear what maintain access to and along the beach means. How about I just leave it at that?
I mean, that in that case, and would you agree, Charlie, that that one maybe we should say ocean shore because that's the public beach.
Yes, in that place, I would say ocean shore is appropriate if you're thinking
and
about
that's where
other.
it caught my eye, was just kind of like, okay, well, what are we saying we're requiring and where?
Yeah, my only point was, you know, that's other question about applicability isn't just to the ocean shore, right?
Yes. Yep. And that's a good point too. And I did mean to say that earlier too, that the permit that you'd have to get once an exception is approved is likely to be through the ocean shore permitting process through Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. But if the proposed structure were to be outside of that, like landward of the ocean shore, then you would need a local jurisdiction permit. And in many cases, that would be a floodplain development permit.
Could that actually happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's happened
I'm kidding.
before.
That was a joke. I'm kidding.
Meg, in this, the larger rulemaking, the larger rule of which this is going to be a part, I read it, but I don't remember does it contain definitions of terms like beach and ocean shore, because those are pretty tightly legally defined. And especially if we're going to be using both terms in here, like Charlie mentioned, we should be careful about which one we're using where and what the definitions are.
Yeah, the ocean shore is defined in OPRD's rules. I can ask Steve if in the beginning part when we say ocean shore for the first time, if we should say as defined in. So I'll ask that question. The other one, beachfront protective structure is not defined, but it is used in the goal language. And so since this is a goal 18 specific rule exception, I think that is clear that that's for that goal and what's in that goal language.
No, I just meant the word beach.
But yeah, I don't know if we use it elsewhere now that we changed that one back to ocean shore.
Okay.
We might not have it anywhere else.
Meg, I would say it's defined in statute. I mean, that's where I would do the reference to is the ORS.
Yeah.
If you were going to reference it, not rule.
Sorry, thank you. I'll do a quick word search to make sure that that's right though. Just see what's up. Beachfront protective structures. Beach nourishment, I think that's okay. Yeah, so that we just changed the only one that refers to just the beach to ocean shore. So I think that helps fix that problem.
Okay. Nobody says ocean shore nourishment. That sounds ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, good points. Okay, so we're at about 3:24. And Charlie says he has to leave early. So we have, you know, a little over half an hour left. Do people feel like we can move on to the impact statements, or do you want to keep moving or keep talking about the language? And if that's the case, then we should maybe schedule a fourth meeting. So I just want to do a quick poll of how people are feeling.
Don't all talk at once.
I know, right?
I don't think we can do that. I think we're getting to the point, or getting close to where public input, legal review, things of that nature makes a lot of sense to me.
How about others?
I'm fine with the language that we have now, but would want Steve to look over this, especially with the kind of open-ended language about mitigation and what does that lead us to? Or what should it lead us to? Does it lead us to, or lead an applicant to being able to do something specific under current legal frameworks in some agency or another? Or is it just an open-ended statement that means that DLCD has to pursue, or parks or somebody has to pursue a new mitigation framework? So I don't think we need to work further on the language of this, but I do think that Steve should review it to make sure we're on the proper page legally.
Thank you. I think I saw Charlie nod, but don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, I mean, I'm still just not quite sure what that is. The intention is if we don't spell it out, of putting it in there. So it's kind of like we're leaving it in there as an opportunity, but we're not defining it and the criteria and the circumstances, and is it required or is it not required? So it's still a little vague to me. And I would like to see that a little bit more specific for both the loss and for the applicant's sake.
Does that vagueness make you feel like you want to have another meeting, or do you feel?
I want to hear what the lawyer has to say about that vagueness. I guess what Steve has to say about it.
Yeah,
I don't feel like we need another meeting. I agree with Chris. We're ready for public input and kind of processing forward.
Okay. Others? Jeff, Laurel, Beth?
Nope.
Real quick, this is Jeff. These kind of A through F are kind of loosely, I think, based off existing goal exception criterion that are in the rules for goal 2. So I think that adding avoid and mitigate is kind of interesting because it's in addition to that criterion that's existing. So just something to flag in the review.
Yeah, I think our intention was kind of to like make clear those other things like the EC analysis, environmental, energy, social impact analysis, because that will still be required, but it is kind of vague and set up for not that it's vague. It's not vague. It's set up for it's set up for different processes, and so the intention here was to try to make this a little more specific to this exception and what is being asked for. So I think like it's to supplement that, but yeah, but putting it here in the reason justification. But it's a good point to say that like if there are similar things or confusing areas between those two, that we should definitely make sure to do a side-by-side comparison. Okay, well, I think we may have lost Melissa. So, okay, so it seems like then everyone feels comfortable moving forward with this, and we'll get some legal review and then public review. And I will communicate back anytime changes are made to the language. I will send that back to the group so you know. So with that said, I will stop share for a minute and move on to the fiscal impact statement.
One quick question, Meg. There was an or in the mitigate statement rather than an and I don't know if you meant to have an and in there or an or, but it seems like it might read better as an and. Sorry to be nitpicky.
That's okay. Let me share it back on so you can tell me exactly.
It was just like a last thing I saw there that I was hung on.
Was it on this part?
Yeah, here it is. Avoid and mitigate long-term or recurring costs to the public. I just didn't know if that should be an and statement or an or statement, or if it really matters, but.
I would say it's an and or.
I was told that you should not use and or in rule
Yeah,
language.
lawyers do not like and or. They like
It can
one
be
or
very
the other.
dangerous. Yeah. But because there actually was one, I don't know if anyone caught that, it was a minor change, but the this first part, public roads and highways, means roadways that are owned, operated, maintained, or any combination thereof. That used to be and or by federal, tribal, state, county, or city government or special district. So if we want it to be and or, we should do any combination thereof, I guess, is the alternative language.
Charlie's point of and, I believe, is correct. It should be an and.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. That sounds better. Thank you. Okay, so I think actually if I just do this, you should be able to see the fiscal impact statement. Hopefully you can see that. No, you cannot? Okay, bummer. Okay, just stop share.
Now, Teams is a little harder that way, I've noticed.
It's also, if you do have your rack packet handy, it is also in there, which might be easier to follow along with, but I also did put them on slides, so. Bear with me here. Okay, can you see that slide now? It says fiscal impact statement. Okay, great. So yes, again, there are 3 that we're required to do for every rulemaking. So that we'll tackle the fiscal one first, because I think that's probably the biggest one in regards to our rulemaking. The other, well, at least the housing one is, I think, will be fairly minimal anyway. So this one is, we must identify and state the agency's estimate of the economic effect of the rules on businesses, with an emphasis on small businesses, and also an estimate of the economic impact on state agencies, units of local government, and the public. We need only address the impact of the proposed rule change from the status quo, rather than the overall fiscal impact of the entire rule. So this is to review what I've put together and see if you agree, and if I'm missing something, or if you disagree with how I've characterized something. And so I broke this one down, into those that participate in a local government goal exception process would be potentially impacted by this. And so it broke it down into the steps. So an applicant would apply for the goal exception, and in this case, it would only be a public body, and then the local planning department who receives the application. Then it would be reviewed by the public, has an opportunity to comment, and a decision is made. And that would include the local planning department, the local planning commission, DLCD, members of the public, adjacent property owners, and the local elected official. And then if the exception is approved, the applicant will then need to apply for a permit for beachfront protective structure with the relevant state, federal, or local government agencies. And that really, the process is not changing at all. It's just expanding. Well, really, it's not expanding the pool of who could apply for it, but it's just creating a new specific reason exception. And that applicants are only going to be public bodies. Does anyone feel like missing something? I feel like there was a chat, sorry.
So it's not really adding a fiscal impact to agencies or applicants so much as giving them another opportunity to apply directly for a goal exception. So it's not adding to their burdens of doing a impact statement or anything else, unless they specifically want this impact statement, right? I mean, unless they specifically want this goal exception.
Yeah, that's my interpretation, is that it's an existing process. It's open to the same groups of people, but it's just putting it in a different way that's a more specific to this situation. And so it's not necessarily adding an expense that wouldn't already have existed. I
Well,
think
we
the
Oh,
next,
are
that's the
asking for
local
a
county
feasibility
planner that's
statement.
dealing with a goal exception.
yeah, but I mean, they would have to do it either way,
Yeah,
right?
no, you're right.
I
I'm
think
just
that's,
kidding. I just guess, I think a local planner would say that it's quite variable what that fiscal impact might look like.
yeah, and that is very true. Like
It's
this
their
could be
time, it's poor
significant.
planners' times is what it is.
Yeah.
Meg, is the feasibility statement that this rule requires something that would not have to be done if this rule did not exist by an applicant?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that that's fair to say that while I think they would have to do it at the permit process either way, they wouldn't necessarily have had to do it at this stage of the process, which is the exception, which does need to come first. So that is maybe an added financial burden.
They'd still have to do an exception though. So we're not creating, I don't think another step, we're just providing more detail for what that would look like.
Well, I think the feasibility assessment in particular that's an additional requirement of the exception process that wouldn't have been required if we didn't have this new exception. Because even though they would have had to do the exception process anyway, we're adding a new assessment to that. I don't know, would that count, do you think, Patty?
Well, we could add it, I suppose.
Which would be a cost to the applicant. I don't know that we have to have enough detail of like actual cost, but it would just be an added cost. Chris, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I gave you two hands there for a second. Question I have, we look at a public road, all small businesses are impacted, right? It could be FedEx, it could be a vacation rental business. If it's a public road, a small business is going to be impacted, right down to FedEx. So I don't really understand why a small business or any business is really tied to this, because they want to comment as a member of the public. They certainly could. I'm just not understanding the connection of a small business to the public road and why it's unique in this scenario.
Well, it's not. It's just a requirement of the fiscal impact statement. We have to address it. So I think you're right. Like it's small businesses won't have to do anything special because of this rule. Like they might be impacted by the results of it, but not by the rule. It's the rule process itself. So you're right. Like, and which is what I said in the second part, that we don't expect them to have any additional administrative activities or anything like that.
I just don't know why that paragraph is in there, but there's probably a reason for it.
Yeah, I mean, because if you think about our agencies or any agency's other rulemaking, that it could have potentially bigger impacts on businesses. So I think that's why it's in there. But in this particular rulemaking, it just doesn't really apply. Okay, so it sounds like maybe something that we'll have to change is just adding that feasibility assessment component, that might be an additional cost above and beyond the existing process now. That's a change.
If you go back the previous slide, is it pre-form or perform?
Sorry, which one? Oh yeah, perform. Thank you. I think it's perform, right? I've never been a good speller.
I make that mistake all the time. That's why I can't type. That's why I pick up on it.
Thanks, thank you. Okay, any other thoughts? Laurel, did you want to say anything about those numbers you put in the chat?
Oh, I just put the numbers in there that you guys were asking for earlier about the Oregon Coast Trail. I was bugging our GIS folks for that, and I got some numbers for you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, where
Yeah,
did those numbers come from? Your GIS department or?
Yep.
Okay. Can you send those to me separately by email? I can't copy and paste from here.
Yep.
Well, if you send
How
them
about
to me,
sending them?
Laurel, I'll send them to everyone.
Yeah, I think everyone should have those. I would really like to see them too.
So that's
Okay.
better. I like superlatives.
Those are, let me say those are estimates. So just so you guys know, they're
Well, I'm
better than
holding you
they're better
to
than my
mile.
guess, but they're still estimates.
I actually didn't realize that much of the Coast Trail was on the beaches. That's a really high percentage. I thought more of it was on the upland.
Well, in
It's
some cases,
it's
there
based
are
on
more.
mileage, right? So yeah, this is based on total mileage. So sorry.
In some cases, they might have more. It could add, the whole totals could add up to more than the beach miles, right? Because in some places they have more than one option. Is that right?
There are more than one option in some places. So I don't know how he handled that. That's one of the reasons why I said these are estimates. Do you want me to copy and paste and email that to you, Meg?
Yeah, if you could just
Okay.
do that, that would be helpful. I can't get to my email right now because of my screens being blocked by everything. So thank you. Okay. So then I'll move on to the next is the racial equity impact statement. And so this is a new requirement of all rulemaking efforts, and it requires agencies to include a statement identifying how adoption of the rule will affect racial equity in the state. This new, so DOJ is helping us work about the particulars with the new requirement, but just wanted to put this. This was kind of my first attempt. So basically saying that the end result, if we have some approvals of the rule, that would result in more shoreline armoring to help with transportation. So that helps support connectivity of the coast and populations that rely on that transportation network. So it would support racial equity objectives by supporting transportation connectivity. But that's just my initial take on it. I don't know if others have thoughts.
If you need confirmation, I think it looks good.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? If you have issues, let me know. If you think we're missing things, maybe. Okay, not hearing any. If you think of any along the way, please feel free to share with me later. These will also be reviewed by our legal counsel. This last one I think will be hopefully pretty easy. This one is, oh, thanks, Charlie. Thank you for participating, and we'll talk next time. This one, the housing impact statement, is again a requirement of all rulemakings. Well, actually, of only those rulemakings done by DLCD, where we have to do a housing cost impact statement, which is an estimate of the effect of the rule on the cost of developing a 6,000 square foot parcel and constructing a 1,200 square foot detached single family dwelling on that parcel. So
positive impact to the materials and labor savings.
Say that again. I didn't quite hear that.
This rule would have a positive impact financially to housing market, because in order to build a house, vehicles need to bring the materials there. So it minimizes the number of detour bypass routes that may or may not be needed. So this rule would have a positive impact to materials and labor. There would be a cost savings.
Okay.
Or avoidance of a cost increase. the same thing would be true on most, if not all of those.
Yeah, because certainly transportation connectivity would have impacts potentially on land values as well. Okay, well, I'll revise those. Basically, at this point, I just said that we don't anticipate a cost increase, but I could also say that there could be positive impacts by not further impacting those costs through road closures and things like that and detours. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Again, I'll make a few little edits to those and send it to our rules coordinator and legal counsel to review, as well as the language of the rule itself. So I just wanted to share a few reminders that, and I don't know that we talked about this last time we met, but since then we did have to delay our hearing schedule with our Land Conservation and Development Commission by a few months because of the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking that's taking place at DLC right now. So our anticipation date for the next steps would be, like I said, we'll sort of finalize all the language and we'll submit to the Secretary of State for filing, which will happen in June. Also, because this rulemaking applies to only a small geographic region and not the entire state, we will be having a geographic public hearing, and we've scheduled that for June 22nd, and that will take place in Newport. And so we'll have an opportunity for people to come and share their testimony with someone from DLCD, so that it will be on the Central Coast, so that hopefully people can travel there if they would like to. And then we'll have the first public hearing with our Land Conservation and Development Commission at their July meeting, which is scheduled for July 21st and 22nd. And typically the rulemakings are done on the first meeting day. So that would be July 21st. And I think they're usually done right away in the morning. So it'd probably be around 9 a.m. that would be considered by the commission. And there will be a public hearing at that date as well. So we'll also have an opportunity for public comment there. I think we're sort of in a transitioning world, as we all know, from virtual to in-person a little bit more. So this may be an in-person meeting, but I'm fairly certain that we will also have, I think we've always had an option for virtual public testimony as well for anyone who can't travel to Salem. And then the next LCDC hearing will be on September 22nd. And that's where they'll vote on whether or not to adopt the rule. And if they do adopt it, then the rule would become effective the next day potentially, or probably the end of September. So that's kind of the timeline as it stands now. Any questions or concerns?
Only to say you did a really good job of emceeing this RAC committee, Meg, and thanks very much for shepherding us and coming up with good language alternatives that we could discuss, so thus keeping the process on track.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, well, and then we decided not to do another meeting, so we don't need to worry about that. I think you all know this already, but also just for anyone in the public listening, that the meetings that we've had, and that this is the third one, that they're all posted on our webpage, and written comments are still can be accepted up until the geographic hearing date, and then we'll still have public time. So there's plenty of time still for public comment, and those can be submitted directly to me, and my email address is there. And I think that's pretty much it. I just want to really thank all of you for for taking the time and going through this process and dealing with all of our schedule changes and all that. Really appreciate your dedication and flexibility and all the really good discussion, because I truly think this role has gotten a lot better because of all of your input. So I really appreciate that and hope you'll continue to stay engaged throughout the rest of this process, even if we're not meeting formally. And with that, I'll let you go a few minutes early, unless anyone has any final questions or thoughts or anything. All right, great. Well, thank you all. And
Thank you.
I'll share final next steps in a couple weeks. Take care.